Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to another weekly edition of Education Matters. My name is Jim O'Connell, and I'm very happy to have you on board. If you're watching live on Tuesday afternoon, it is at 6 p.m. on the 5th of June. You, of course, are always welcome to call in. The call-in number should be on the screen right now. If it is going out live, it's the area code 603. Phone-in number is 640-3091. Why I refer to the live thing, in case some of you aren't aware of it or are watching it on Facebook later or on YouTube later or whatever. The program is available on IPM Nation at any time. But it's repeated on Manchester community television a number of times during the week, and those obviously are not live, and so the live show is on Tuesday at 6 p.m. Once again, the call-in number is 640-3091, and as I always say, please feel free to call. You don't have to agree with me. If you have something to contribute to education generally, or particularly as it relates to Manchester schools, then you're very welcome. So here we are, coming to the end of the school year, and it's amazing how fast it goes by. And I'm just looking at the, I often recommend, and I do again, that people jump on mansd.org, the Manchester School District website, where there's lots of information always available. And even though there's lots of other stuff I was going to, So I guess the big issue is sort of where we are in the calendar stuff. The last day of school for pre-K students is June 8th, just at the end of this week. And then high school commencement, or graduation, as I call it, is on June the 9th. And then the final day for all classes, except for the seniors who have already graduated, will be on June 15th, 10 days from now. So this weekend is an exciting time. I have a daughter who's graduating, so congratulations to her, but to all her friends and all the young people in Manchester who will be walking up those stairs at the Verizon, now the Southern New Hampshire University Centre, on Saturday to accept their high school diplomas. The MST, Manchester School of Technology, will go first at 8 a.m. The memorial commencement will begin at 10 a.m. The West commencement will start at 2 p.m. and Central at 6 p.m. And if you haven't been to these graduations before, they're quite large. They're busy. If you want to be there in a timely manner, you really need to be there. Arriving, these will start sharp at the times. So the bigger ones at the 10 a.m., you need to get there for 9 or 9:30, and likewise the 2 p.m. be there an hour before that, and Central at 6 p.m. You'd want to be there a half an hour before that. But it's a big day in the life of the school district. We have 14,000 students in our schools. I'm not sure what number will graduate on Saturday, but I think a rough calculation is probably close to 1,000. If you think about 14 years or 13 years of school, it should be something like that. It's probably front-loaded on the younger end, so it might be a little less than that. I don't know what size the graduating classes are, but a lot of great young people who've done a lot of work, and of course they've done work that has been put in front of them, and they've been taught by wonderful teachers in schools managed by great administrators, and a great deal of credit all around is deserved when you go to these graduations. It's pretty awe-inspiring to see another generation of kids heading out onto the streets. I wanted to mention an event which is connected to this, and there was an event which I thought was a very nice thing. I don't know if it has happened previously, but I hadn't heard of it previously, but it was last, I think, Thursday night, when at City Hall, Mayor Craig and Dr. Vargas, the school superintendent, and some of our public representatives gathered at City Hall to compliment and congratulate those from our high school graduation classes who will be entering the various services of the United States military. And in attendance were, of course, Mayor Craig, and I see Alderman O'Neill here, and Chris Pappas was there, the executive councillor with Mayor Craig. But the most important people there, of course, were the young people who were actually taking up the challenge of joining the military and defending our freedoms. And I'd like to take a minute to mention them. And they're broken out by high school. So at West High School, there were 3 students. One, Michael Anglin, going to the Marine Corps, Cameron Bergeron to the Air Force, and Joshua Burpee to the National Guard. So congratulations to West. At Memorial, or from Memorial, there were also 3, Emmett Winborn going to the Army, Rene Champagne going to the National Guard, and Sean Pike going to the Army. So congratulations to those 3 young men and women joining our defence forces, and then or our military. And then from Central, there is Elliot Lawrence going to the Army, Jeremiah Rivera going to the Navy, Emanuela Sadia going to the Army, Dilip Tamang to the National Guard, Gabriella Leonard to the U.S. Naval Academy, Idris Kenchel to the Marine Corps, Kyle Gauthier to the Marine Corps. So that's quite a list. So congratulations to them, and they join a long list of young people from Manchester who've joined the Marine Corps. I'd also take this opportunity to congratulate the music teacher of almost 20 years, I think 19 years, at the band leader at Central High School, Mr. Sterling. There was a wonderful thank you event for him that students and the music people put on the other night to thank him for his work at Central High School over the years. And generally thank you to all the teachers who are retiring this year for their work. But I want to stick with Mr. Sterling a while, because connected to this issue of young people joining the military, Mr. Sterling, in his time at Central High School, has every year commemorated the names of those and the list of those people, the Gold Star students of Central High School, who going back for 100 since 1846, young people have given the ultimate sacrifice who attended Central High School. I know that perhaps the most famous of students who the best known from Manchester in the military is probably Rene Gagnon, one of the 4 or 5 gentlemen who in the Marine Corps who raised the U.S. Stars and Stripes over Iwo Jima in that iconic photograph, and later it's been repeated as in bronzes and statues, and but everybody recognises the raising of the flag over Iwo Jima, and the fact that a student from Manchester schools and a citizen of Manchester was there should be a source of great pride to all of us. But Mr. Sterling, every year on Memorial Day, on a concert coming up to Memorial Day, puts on there might be the Battle Hymn of the Republic, whatever it might be, a different piece of music each year. But while the band at Central is playing, up come the faces, as many as can be found, some of them very, very old photographs. But if not the faces, then the names of the hundreds and hundreds of men and women who gave the ultimate sacrifice, who had walked the halls of Central High School. It's always a very moving night, and we go about our lives every day, and we are busy, putting food on the table and putting gas in our cars and playing on our social media, whatever we may be doing, attending kids' sporting events. But I think it's important that we do commemorate the people who have given the ultimate sacrifice. And so we're given an opportunity like we were on Memorial Day, and it was great to see the bands from all the schools. It's the only time we see the bands from the 4 middle schools and from our 3 high schools parade, and that was a wonderful thing to see. And in an event just prior to that is the one that I'm talking about at Central, where these people are honoured. So it's wonderful to see a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 people entering the United States Defense Forces with their high school diplomas with them, and particularly I'd point out Gabriella Leonard, who going to the U.S. Naval Academy, a wonderful young lady, and I wish her and all her friends the best. Let me move on from there and talk about this last school board meeting that we had on. And so we go from the wonderful and thought-provoking and positive to the ridiculous. And at our last school board meeting, it was very disturbing to watch. A discussion that went on and on about an ad hoc committee for to add students, a student or students to the school board, and I watched the entire thing unfold live on public access television, and I had a growing sense of disappointment as the discussion went on. The open I don't know. I don't want to add to the furor by using words. I was going to say animosity, but the lack of decorum, the lack of common, being able to reach common ground was very disturbing. And I've been thinking about this during the week, and I'd like to say a couple of things about it. First of all, I think about the fact that all of these people who are at these school board meetings, I know some of them may be availing themselves of the healthcare, free healthcare from the city, and I talked about that last week and said that I thought that should stop. But that's not the issue I want to talk about here. The fact is they are giving of their time, most of them, for free. And so there's no, these people are there. We have to believe they're there to do their best. They feel strongly about education and about kids, and so it is. So I recognize that, and I think about. I was looking at the calendar, and I see all the subcommittee meetings, and they all have to be populated, and people have to go and read their briefs and understand what's going on. And of course, then they have parades and classes and graduations, etc., to attend. This Saturday, the 9th, when graduation is held for those for the high schools, it starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, and Central's at 6 o'clock. That will finish by about 8. And there will be school board members, someone like Mayor Craig or Mayor Gratz before her did it, where they attend every single one. Dr. Vargas will be there, I presume, for every one. It's a long, long day. And then school board members, some will do the schools from their areas, whatever they may decide. But it's just one Saturday of 1,000, whatever nights and et cetera that they do. So these are not cheap words to just say, oh, they're nice people, they're doing nicely. But I think as members of the community, we owe deference to people who give of their time and their energy to put their names forward and be elected as public representatives. It's not a small thing, and so. That's part of what I was thinking about as I was watching this, and I'm thinking, and the other thing was that this is a very small city. It would be a village or a town in most of the larger states in the United States. I think it's the 246th or 47th largest city in the United States. And to be clear about that, so there are well more than 200 cities or towns that are bigger. So it's not, it's not New York, it's not Chicago, it's not Los Angeles. And so you'd think it would be easy for the community to come together on some of these topics. But to see a committee riven on a subject around allowing student voices on the school board was hugely disappointing. So I meant what I said about being grateful to everybody for the work that they do. And so I'm not sitting here throwing brickbats for the sake of throwing brickbats, but it was very disturbing as somebody who wants the best for Manchester schools and students like I do, to watch a school board meeting like the last one where there was what it seemed to be open animosity, impatience, a lack of compromise, a stridency, even a mean-spiritedness from some people, which was just very disturbing. And it left one wondering at the end of it, how do we move forward as a district? Where do we go in order to find 14 people, or 15 if you include the mayor, who actually can move our city forward positively. And just as an aside to this, to be very fair, if Mayor Gatsis were still in office, then one of my comments would have been, the buck sort of has to stop somewhere, and in this case, it's formerly newly minted Mayor Joyce Craig, but Mayor Craig has been in office now for 6 months or 5 months, and so in the end, I think she owns some of this. And it's not that she can fix everything, but in the end, it has to start somewhere. So it was disappointing to see a meeting devolve into the kind of drama that the last one did. And then to just describe what it was all about, for those who didn't see it, there has been a quest, a drive to add student voices to the Board of School Committee in Manchester. Now, this is something that is allowed under state legislation, and has been and legislation has been put in place to sort of guide the boundaries of it. And so, exactly how it might be implemented in Manchester is not clear as yet. The decision was made at a board meeting a couple of weeks ago, or a little over, to set up an ad hoc committee to look into that. So the ad hoc committee was to be set up to decide how to move forward in Manchester, how should, across the whole spectrum, from having a student representative who gets asked something from time to time or comes up and, does a 3-minute stint or something, all the way through to having a student who might be a full board member. I don't know if that's actually allowable or envisaged under the legislation, but what is allowable is to have a school student or students representing the district on the school board with full membership, excluding voting rights, and perhaps some other provisions around privacy issues and things like that. But basically, a student who would have pretty much a strong voice on that committee. So the decision was made to create an ad hoc committee in order to decide how to move forward. Should this person be elected? Should they be chosen by principals? Should they be elected by their peer group of students? Should there be a student election? Whatever. It's not important. There's a meeting actually, the first meeting of this ad hoc committee, which I hope I can be at, but it's on, I think it's on, if I could find it right here. I don't have it. I do in calendar. The meeting is on tomorrow night at 5 p.m. And does it say where it's on? I presume it's at City Hall. So it's a student ad hoc committee meeting Wednesday, June 6th from 5 to 6 p.m. So, okay, so I've opened up a whole other bunch of screens that I didn't need. So, Mr. Art Baudry, the chairperson of the board, was who has the role of choosing the assignments for all subcommittees. Or ad hoc committees and special committees on the school committee. He was tasked with populating the ad hoc committee. Now, another fact, there was a group called the YOU. It's a youth leadership group who is made up primarily of minority students from the Manchester School District, and they've been coming to school board meetings in Manchester and perhaps to automatic meetings too for a long time, more than a couple of years, as they've been pushing towards, as each of them getting older and approaching graduation, they've been pushing this issue of having a student representative on the school board. That YOU group are the primary movers behind the idea that we're even looking at this ad hoc committee thing or looking at the subject. YOU, if you stay with me, is connected to or sponsored by a group called the Granite State Organizing Project, which is a community organizing group that are involved in progressive issues in the state and in the city. So they're involved with things like immigrant rights and I'm not sure which pieces, but perhaps minimum wage or something, whatever their various programs might be. So this brings us to Mr. Baudry choosing the ad hoc committee. So according to Mr. Baudry, what he did was pretty straightforward. Any of the members of the school board who expressed an interest in serving on this committee, he just put them on. So it turns out there were 7 school board members who expressed an interest in going on the ad hoc committee, and so those 7 were placed on the ad hoc committee. And then Mr. Baudry reached out to the principals of the high schools, and I think MST as well is a high school also. So of the 4 principals, he reached out to them and asked them to designate a person from each of their schools. And so 4 names were put forward to make a total of 11. And this was to be the ad hoc committee, which would have its first meeting tomorrow night, June the 6th. So what's the problem with that, you would say? It all seems very legitimate. It seems like a reasonable way to go about things. I'd have comments to make about it, but it seemed reasonable enough. The primary, let me just turn off my phone. The primary issue, what became very contentious, was the fact that the young, mostly ladies, who were all African American or of African extraction descent, who had worked for a long time and had been attending meetings for a long time to advocate for, to speak about, and to have meetings on their own about the whole idea of having student representatives on the school board. Well, there was nobody from that group included in the ad hoc committee. So as you can imagine, that left a bad taste in lots of people's mouths. I think visually it looked bad, it smelled bad, and this is where the big ruckus comes in, because people got their backs up, and I don't know what goes on inside in school board members Baudry's mind. I've known Mr. Baudry for quite a long time, and so I take him at his word when he says that he set up an ad hoc committee he left whoever wanted to be on. He didn't pick and choose. He put all 7 on, and his method for finding students to be on the ad hoc committee seems like a reasonable one. Asked the principals, they came up with it. So I can understand giving him and I don't have any special insight here. I just think that seems very rational to me. That's how he ended up with his 11. However, as soon as it was obvious, or as soon as somebody mentioned it, or as soon as because obviously Mr. Baudry didn't think about it in those terms. He went forward and did things in the way that one should, in a sort of colour-blind, race-blind, minority-blind, interest group-blind way. Of course, you look at that's one side. Now, if you look at it from the other side, you've got people on the other side who would say that, look, there was always some resistance to having young people on the board anyway, or student opinion on the board. There are some like that. Um, there are some who, frankly, weren't fans of having minorities over-represented or having a special place. All of these things can be very contentious, but at least there were all kinds of there were suspicions of all these things, and you think that rationally, that 14 people sitting. Let me just finish that thought. My idea was this. My thought is, as soon as it became obvious that this doesn't look quite right, these young ladies have fought for a long time for this whole thing to start. The fact that they were omitted from the ad hoc committee. I understand. I don't want to be part of the argument. I understand perfectly legitimately how Mr. Beaudry came up with his committee, and don't want to argue with him or anybody else about it. I think fine. My problem is with the next step. As soon as that was realised, and as soon as it was clear that there was at least a smell test problem, that minority students in the city had advocated for a long time, and then a bunch of majority students and school board members get to sit around and decide the future. That doesn't pass the smell test, and so I think I don't know whether Joyce Craig tried to manage this in the back room, so to speak, or in the days before the burst up at the last school board meeting or not. But the fact is, it wasn't resolved. Perhaps she tried very hard and wasn't able to reach some kind of resolution. But I was very disappointed that the school board couldn't recognise the problem for what it was. I thought that Committeewoman Ambrosia's proposal, which was she was the first person, I believe, to speak on this topic at the, or perhaps it was right after Mr. Beaudry explained what he had done. Her suggestion was, look, she was one of the 7 who was chosen or who had decided to go on the ad hoc committee. She had done it previously, she said, but without a positive response. And she offered again at the meeting to withdraw her name so she'd come off the ad hoc committee, and if Mr. Beaudry or the committee or others would then just choose one of the girls from the YOU group to be part of the ad hoc committee. Frankly, I thought that was a perfect solution. I thought it was reasonable. In the end, ladies and gentlemen, the problem with all of this is that this was the ad hoc committee, which is only going to meet to discuss how best to move forward and how the city might add student representation and a student voice. And we couldn't even get beyond. I have someone who might have some light to cast on this joining us in the distance there, Mr. Terrio, school board member. Welcome, Ross. Top of the morning to you. Just anywhere you would like. Just anywhere there is good.
Any questions for me?
Well, let me just set this up because I'm just talking about the I don't want to bore everybody again, but very quickly.
Teacher negotiations?
No, that's on my agenda for tonight. I don't know if I'll get to it. No, I was huh.
I have full faith and confidence in you.
Yeah, well, we'll see. But I was talking about my great disappointment at the last school board meeting, and I started off by saying, and I'll be very. I started off by saying that everybody in that committee, are people who've given of their time, and even though I've talked about the healthcare thing recently, as perhaps people should rethink that. Not perhaps, I believe they. But other than that, they don't get any compensation. People like you, and I said this just now.
$40 a week.
Well, I was talking about the fact that there were 14 people in that committee plus Joyce Craig, the mayor, and that I spent some time laying out all the amount of time they spend and the amount of effort they make, and we as people need to be grateful to them. They obviously feel passionate about the schools. My next thing was that then I was hugely disappointed to be sitting at home watching the last meeting live. It wasn't no anger, but just great disappointment. I was saddened and disappointed and left wondering how do we move forward as a district when a group of supposedly reasonable people, any one of them who's reasonable on their own, couldn't get through this thing without reaching loggerheads. I did single out Mayor Craig because I wanted to make the point that I thought it was a terrible demonstration of public governance, and in the end the buck stopped somewhere, and it wasn't anything that she particularly did, but I thought it's something that should have been managed offline beforehand if there was that much degree of feeling, and for all I know she tried very hard for the week or two before that and just couldn't reach resolution. But I'm not trying to point the finger at Joyce or at Mayor Craig.
You didn't think she ran the meeting well?
I don't know if it could, yes, partially, but I don't know. I don't know. I couldn't point to a particular place where she should have done something different. My real criticism was one of this: the making of sausage can be done offline. Not that no backroom deals, but just simply that I just thought it became unedifying and problematic, and particularly we're talking in the end, the unspoken or spoken word is we're talking about race relations, ethnicity, minorities, etc., was central to that discussion. And let me tell you, just before you come in, where I got to was, I have no inside information, so I take someone like Art Beaudry, who I've known for many years, at his word. It seems perfectly reasonable that he went through the method he did. Anybody who ended up asking to be on, from the committee, who has to be on the ad hoc committee, this is an ad hoc committee to set up a situation. He said 7 applied. I put in all 7. It seems he went to a reasonable solution for finding students. He went to the 4 principals and said, find me 4 people. He came back with 4 people. And if you put a period at the end of that, that's a very reasonable stance. And so you'd have to say, Mr. Beaudry, fine. The problem only comes in, the problem now starts after that, right? So that's all fine. Yep. No malfeasance, nothing bad. No, I'm not accusing anybody of anything. But now, when you look at it from the point of view of the kids the young people from the YLU group who had spent time and energy, and young people's time is as valuable as anybody else's. And the fact that they all happen to be minorities and of African or African American descent, etc., and that they'd been the ones at meetings and attending meetings, both at City Hall, full board meetings, and in other places for a long time. When you sat back at the end of the process that Mr. Beaudry went through and you found yourself that they weren't there, you could take the Jimmy LaHoo view, as I saw it, which was, you take some credit and some reward for the fact, the young ladies, that you got the process to hear. And this is part of, and that was a valid point. Lots of people made valid points. The bottom problem, though, is that they ended up not represented. And so for me, I thought the simple compromise of Sarah Ambrosi offered at the very outset of the meeting, which was to withdraw herself from the 7 and have one of the young people added, was a perfect compromise. And so now I'll turn to you, but before the whole point, and so the fact that it degenerated into other things was a problem for me, and people got in camps and trenches and all kinds of things. But if I would suggest to you that the system, it doesn't matter that what Mr. Beaudry did was understandable, defendable, and entirely sensible. But when you see the result of when you see the result at the end, it's not as though this was a presidential election. It's not as though this was the actual establishment of the committee and a young person was going to be taken from a particular group and put on the board. It was an informal ad hoc committee to discuss the solutions. I think the board lost sight of that. It was as though they were fighting over the actual inclusion on the board, and why people couldn't understand the patent unfairness, or at least the appearance of unfairness, of omitting one of them from the board. I found that and then the resulting conversation problematic. Ross.
Thank you, Jim. Wow, lot to say.
Well, I was trying to set up because most people, of course, won't have seen it.
And this is week after week you talk about your disappointment.
Do I really?
Yeah. And I just want to remind you of a line from Shakespeare.
Yeah.
To those that feel the world is a comedy, to those that think the world is a tragedy.
To those that
think the world is a tragedy.
Yeah.
To those that feel the world is a comedy.
Okay.
The thinkers are always pessimistic, I guess.
One defensive thing I would say when I started off tonight, because I tried to do this, I talked about the wonderful weekend that was coming up of graduation from our high schools, and I read through the list of young people who were joining the military and what a wonderful event there was for them. Because I always like to have some, talk about some positive things. So I did talk to our friends in the audience about the work that teachers did, that administrators, and I mentioned each one, teachers, administrators, and everybody in the community we did to produce close to 1,000 graduates from our school system ready to meet the world. And so it wasn't all doom and gloom, and this was my subject that I went to. But go ahead.
But and I have to take, this is my 5th year in the board, obviously.
Yeah.
When I finish my term, it'll be 6 years.
Right.
I have to take some blame for the whatever you want to call that the other night, the agitation. I was in my 5 years on the board, I have to say it was probably the angriest I've ever been
Really?
Yeah, I try to keep a
Yeah.
tight control on my
Yeah, yeah,
emotions.
yeah.
Be professional, and I do think that my anger, although I didn't have an outburst or a
Yeah.
meltdown, I do think
You
that
didn't seem angry when you.
I think I was getting a little bit more passionate than I wanted to, and probably the angriest I've ever been on the board. I see many different things. For instance, Arthur. Here's the thing: you have to have, being a public official, you have to have thick skin.
Yeah.
You have to, because you're going to take criticism. And I think, and I talk to Arthur, I consider him a friend of mine. I talk to him probably twice a week about different school board issues.
Right.
And he's a wealth of knowledge. What I like about Arthur, he has such institutional memory. People
Yep.
talk about term limits, but one of the negatives about term limits is Arthur has been on the board forever.
Right.
So he remembers, this is the policy, this is the person you go to. Oh, we tried that before.
Right.
It didn't meet federal legal requirements, things like that. Things that like a
And
newbie
and
would
you know, I don't know if you know, but I don't need to be sold on Art Beaudry. I've known Art a long time, and Art's a good guy. He's always at the end of the phone.
But
And
he takes, and I like Arthur.
I don't
He's
always
very
agree with him.
passionate.
I don't always agree with him, but that's fine. I don't need to agree with people all
Very
the time.
passionate about it. He cares about Manchester.
Yep.
He cares about the school system.
Right.
And I think, and this is just my guess, is that Arthur, he did it. He was hands off.
Yeah.
He said, he went to the principal. He said, look, we need a member of the committee from each school. You pick.
Which is all fine. So
He
we're all
didn't-
good
he
with
didn't-
that.
He didn't say, don't pick a YOU member,
Right.
or don't pick so and so, or pick this kid. So it was all females. The committee members.
Were they?
Yeah,
I didn't
all
know that.
females.
Okay.
Two, from my understanding, I assume were white kids and 2 were Asian kids.
Right.
And he thought that was.
Oh, you mean of the four
Of the
school
four,
students?
two
Okay.
girls were
I think it was
Asian,
number
two
school.
girls
But
were
okay.
white.
Yeah. Yeah.
From the 4 schools, so
Yeah.
he was fine.
Right.
So I think maybe he took the criticism personal that
Yeah.
he did it exactly how he's supposed to. He did what he was supposed to do.
Yep.
We've never, in the history of the board, I don't think we've ever revoked a special committee after it's been put together.
Mm-hmm.
So he probably took it personally, got upset. And again, the board, I thought there was possibly in a gray area, a personal conflict. The board said that I was wrong. I live by the decision of the board.
And I
And
can.
some things, when I see things, and again, I have enough humility to say that I'm not always right.
Right.
And that's what's nice about democracy, and that's what's nice about capitalism. Because what is
Right.
capitalism? It's basically a democratic financial system where people say, no, this is worth more money than that. This service is worth more than that. This career is worth more than that. Whereas in, say, communism, where it's going to say, okay, this is what's valuable.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Provided the tram lines, the rails are there. Yeah.
yes. But the Board of School Committee said, no, Ross, you're wrong. There is not a conflict
And can I
of
just stop you
interest."
there, if you don't mind?
Sure,
Just for
go ahead.
because I
It's your
have.
show.
No.
You
Well,
have the
I.
keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, well, I don't want to be. I'm not here with the gavel. I'm not. I'm not, we're having a conversation. I mean, we're having a conversation. If you think about it, we're having a conversation for those people in Manchester interested in education. And if I know from talking to other people, they were disappointed by that meeting. Now people have all kinds of torches to carry, and they're carrying water for other people. Not to mix all my metaphors, right? So just because people are sometimes it suits people to be disappointed by things. But I was genuinely sorry, and I think I don't. There probably wasn't a board member came out of that meeting feeling good about it.
No, there was a lot of hard feelings.
Yeah, and on any side. So nobody wants that, right? So it's like how do you, but with regard to the piece about conflict of interest thing, I can only offer this. I don't know what Dave Scannell does 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I do know that there were a number of conversations. I've been at 3 meetings that I don't believe they were organised by the GSOP, but they could have been. But honestly, they were. We had 3 meetings over the last 2 years that I attended, and I think they were the only ones. But I could be wrong. But at those meetings, never really the same group, but some of the people from YOU were there. But there were people from the Hispanic community, from the Eritrean community, from the Nepali community, from all the different communities, and it was kind of an ill-defined discussion about sort of minority and immigrant and refugee and difference, whatever. There was no sort of written agenda. This is what we're going to deal with. But there were meetings held in the Unitarian Church on Union Street last summer in particular, and people showed up. They were open to anybody.
Yes.
People showed up. I'm not a member of any of those things. It came to me just because of probably who I am that most of the people who were there were people representing the minority community. There was, but Dave Scannell attended a couple of those meetings, 2 of the 3 that I was at, and like I said, it was only 3. Now, at those discussions, it was not about adding a student to the student. It wasn't the end topic. That the topic was more about issues of fairness, equity, distribution of resources, and and I learned a lot. There were I don't want to take up this. There were a couple of important things from those meetings. First was the lack of understanding of most people around the table about how the district worked and just how the school system worked, and that was huge. So there was a huge need for education to the population who we take it for granted. Many people watching this show know kindergarten, then your kid goes to grade school, and this is where they are, and this is how it works. Because I went there, and my grandfather went there. There are people here who don't quite get it. So anyway. I don't want to start off defending what's his name or Dave Scanlon and this, but I do know. I don't know if he was actually a member.
Tribalism, because you're carrying the water for a fellow Irishman, huh?
Yeah. Well, we're all. I carry water for you.
Yeah, that's true. My grandmother was
Yeah. No, I'm not. No, I don't want to carry water for anybody. I have my biases, but let's go back to the meeting.
I would say, but I have enough, and I was contacted by a constituent. Said no, it wasn't a conflict of interest because it was too tenuous.
Yeah.
I thought it was a gray area, but again, it's a democracy. The school board, the majority of the school board doesn't agree, because I'm just one point of view. I thought it was, but the majority of my board members, my fellow board
members, wasn't your premise though that he was a member of the thing, or at least so closely associated?
Not an official member, but in speaking with another board member, the story that I got was that he attends lots of GSOP meetings.
Well, he is, because Mary George has attended a couple of those meetings also.
Well, I would have asked her to
and she's the only. But that
would be the one who told me. But again,
but if I had been a school board member from the 3 meetings I was at over the long, I go to 1 million meetings a year. I'm not a member of GSOP. I'm not a party to what they do. I don't fully understand their full remit. I don't know how they're sourced or fund. I know them as an organization that's out in the world. I went to 3 meetings in Manchester over an 18-month period to talk about student issues around race, etc. But that I found people there from lots of different, the NAACP. I don't know who was there. I actually didn't ask. There were people there, but they weren't from the GSOP. Okay. So if I'd been on that, and I carried that baggage into that meeting as I watched it, because I don't know. Now, for all I know, Dave Scanlon's a paid-up member of the GSOP.
No. I took him at his word that he is not a member. He's not an official member. He attends meetings. In talking to Mary, it seemed like they both attend a lot of meetings. Right. Even though they're not official members, but again,
and maybe that's so. I thought it
was a gray area. I'm glad we explored. I didn't like the emotions that were attached to it, but the majority of the board says no, Ross, you're wrong. That's not a conflict of interest, and I can live with that. That's something that I saw was there, but the rest of the board members don't know there's nothing there. And
well, I think it's a gray area. It was just a question of whether it was dark gray approaching black.
With myself about how I was kind of angry and passionate a little bit more than I would have expected or wanted to be, but we move on.
We do. And my thought was watching it, Ross, was I thought that I was putting myself in your seat, and I'm saying Ross thinks that Representative Scannell is actually is in everything but name. Like, he's not a paid up member, but he's been at their meetings. He's part of what they do and is fully aware of it all. And that's where this is a conflict of interest if you're sitting in that seat. And I don't know if all, but my thought, just from the limited knowledge I have of the iceberg in the water, was that that wasn't. But anyway, let's move on. That wasn't the case. But
no. Yeah. But so the end result
we still get
is,
to without
and let me
resolution.
Just, a little bit of one of the resolutions is Mary George has called me and she said, well, how can we? Initially, I think she was against the YOU, overturning Mr. Beaudry's decision and bringing a YOU member on. And in talking with Mary, I had a thought. I said, in looking at it, there was 4 girls, there were 2 white girls, there were 2 Asian girls, and maybe this was a bad idea on my part. I said, well, maybe not a YOU member, but we have a huge, obviously a very diverse city. I said we have a fair amount of African students and African Americans, black population. We have a fair amount of Latino students. I said, why don't we bring on a black student and a Latino student? Right. And some of the others said, that's a horrible idea.
Yeah, now we're picking quota. Yeah, which is a horrible idea. But again, I can understand it. It's well-intentioned.
And that went over like a lead balloon. They said, no, that's, in talking with Mary, that's kind of one of the, we were trying to come up with ways of coming up with a resolution, and that was my resolution.
Yeah, what was the great resistance to the Ambrosi solution? Like, why not? Why was that not just an easy thing? Considering it's an ad hoc committee, not the end result.
I don't know. I think Arthur had made the decision. It was in the past. He was hands off in making it. He just didn't think. He did.
So can I say something?
But the end result is this.
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to live with it.
Yeah.
And not only live with it, but be welcoming, and be as. So the YOU member has been appointed.
How were they chosen? Just they picked a name or something, or they were asked? And it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Either way.
Mostly it's central. They talked to the central administration. I don't know a
about
lot
it,
but I know they found
yeah,
somebody from
yeah.
YOU.
Right.
She's been picked. She's been invited to to come to the meetings tomorrow night.
Yeah.
And she'll be more than welcome.
Right.
And we'll look forward to her input. And it's unfortunate that I and others. It's an unfortunate, but don't take it out on kids. Don't take it out on the students. Don't make them feel unwelcome. Don't.
Well, I just want to get.
We need to move on.
Right. So look, you know me well enough, at least, to know. So things like, not surprisingly, immigration issues, minority issues, etc. I'm a progressive with a capital P. In my views.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah. And all the, some people think those are pejoratives, but I wear them. I wear them proudly. And I'd surprise people in some of my attitudes, but we're not here to examine me in great detail. I'm just saying that I don't mind all of that, but I have to say that I was very surprised at those meetings I went to, that I found myself on the back foot. I was surprised at the level of. I was surprised at some of the things that were happening that I didn't know were happening.
Like what?
In our schools, for instance, the disparities. See, here's the thing. So everybody gets defensive when you talk about discrimination and racism. Yeah. I haven't heard at all at any point of some a racist policy or implementation or something like that. But clearly, it's messier than that. It's not as simple as that, right? So what I found myself sitting around the table with people who didn't agree with each other. Yeah. So these various communities came at it very differently and had very different views, and depending on where they came at the school district from, and the city more broadly. But I was surprised. I thought, I was there as the to offer some insight into, answer some questions that people had, which were just functional, utilitarian questions like, well, how do you go? Like, how does a child get chosen to go which school and whatever? Just some very basic stuff. But it was made plain to me very early in that first meeting, and we had some coffee and donuts for people. And like I said, it's an open door onto the street. Anybody was welcome. And after a while, I was put back in my box a little bit by people who kind of told me I didn't know what I was talking about.
Well, why didn't they think you know what you're talking about?
Not in a nasty way. Well, actually, some people got it. Well, they were saying like you're looking at it from your perspective, and for you have no idea what we go through.
Well, let me stop you for a second.
Yeah.
And a lovely story. I was in India, and the Jain faith.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, JAIN
or whatever.
Yeah.
So they have a story, and I love this story. There's 5 blind men walking out, and they come across an elephant. And this is basically man's description of God, but it would actually fit many things. Is one blind man touches the elephant, touches his truck, and says, God, the elephant is this way, and somebody touches his tail. And so it's not that your perspective is wrong.
Right.
It says just that you have a different perspective than
correct.
And here's why, and I want to touch on that. And part of the reason why I got upset is because I've thought about this for years. So my wife's from Brazil.
Right.
And her father, my father-in-law, her father was part black, light-skinned black man. So she was Latino and mixture of African descent.
Right.
And the other thing is, when I went to school, my best friend, who I still keep in touch with, is a woman from Haiti.
Right.
And two things I want to. So one of the things we heard about is racism, and I'm very concerned about this. Is if you see things and you always think it's racism, but it might be. For instance, when I was a young man, I used to be stopped by the police all the time and now I know about reasonable suspicion and probable cause. And there was none. They would stop me and say, "Oh, you were driving funny," or "Let me see your inspection sticker." It was BS.
Yeah.
They would stop me. Now, if I was black, I'd say, "Oh, they stopped me because I'm black."
Right.
I don't know why, because most of the police who stopped me, some of them were of color,
right.
Of Latino or black, but
right.
I don't know why they were stopping me just to harass me.
Right.
But as a white person, I used to be stopped a lot, but I can't say it was racial because it wasn't.
Right.
But I think, and the reason why I bring this up, because one of the girls said, I didn't understand the material, and they asked me to, for instance, that maybe I should go to a lower level, and that was her. She was alluding to the fact that that might have been racism or discrimination. Same thing happened to my son. He
Right.
was in a level 4 math class, was doing horribly. Went to the school, said, "What should we do about this?" They said, consider going into a lower level. He
Right.
did, and he did fine. It wasn't racism. It's just the educators know the students, and they know what you can do usually, and sometimes what you can't do. And they, for instance, same situation. I didn't think it was racism. Again, with my son, he wanted to go at MIT. When we were talking to probably the top 20, 25% of his class, said the guidance counselor said, you need to be realistic. Because that guidance counselor puts kids in
Yep.
college all the time.
They know their
and,
stuff,
And,
yep.
and I didn't think that was racism. It wasn't. But we
Right.
had another student of color who said, I wanted to go to a good college, and my guidance counselor told me to be realistic, and that,
Right.
and that was, she alluded to that was discrimination or racism. Here's the problem. I
I
think
agree.
what
Yep.
the guidance counselor, the teacher in those two instances were probably white,
Right.
the students were of color,
Right.
and they took that to be offensive or discrimination or racism, but that was her perspective. And this is my concern, is that they're seeing things through a prism of racism,
Right.
like everything. And the same thing happened to my son, who although he's Latino, he looks white, and we didn't think it was racism because
Right.
that's just the school, how they.
And I fully understand that.
And that's my concern. Is,
Yeah.
And the other thing, the reason why I brought up my wife and my friend from Haiti,
Yeah.
when we were living in Boston, in a predominantly Latino neighborhood, I spent a lot of time with my wife.
What neighborhood was that, if you want me to say? Which neighborhood?
Somerville.
Oh, yeah. I
Part
love
of Somerville.
love
Winter Hill, where
Somerville.
the Irish
Yeah,
criminals
yeah,
used to
yeah,
hang out.
yeah.
The Whitey Bulger's, his
Yeah,
brother.
yeah,
They used
yeah.
to Winter Hill, but it's now predominantly. A lot of it's Latino.
Yeah.
And
I
anyways,
love Somerville. It's a wonderful
got married in
ethnic.
Somerville.
Did you
my,
really?
My honeymoon was in Somerville.
I had a bunch of friends who were Lebanese guys who lived all over, like Watertown, Cambridge. But we used to go eat in Somerville. There was two great Lebanese restaurants, like hidden away, but it's where the Lebanese used to go eat. But anyway, there was.
But
some,
here's the problem, I don't blame you, Jim. I think you're a great person, but the liberal progressive, this false narrative. Listen, I don't live in La La Land. I know that there's racist and then racist incidents.
Yeah.
But here's the problem, and it happened to my wife and it happened to my friend from college. They were both. So I said to my wife, I said, there's jobs up in New Hampshire. Let's move to New Hampshire. She was kind of scared,
Right.
Because there's a Latino person. My wife doesn't look white. She looks different. She has a heavy, heavy accent, like you. She came to America when she was 20. She didn't speak English, so she's always going to have an accent.
There's a friend. I can tell you, there's a friend of mine in Manchester. He lives now. He just moved. He lives in a little town, one of the towns outside Manchester. But he's like a 6'6" African American guy. He's an airline pilot. And we were talking one day. We were at a basketball game, and my daughter played together, and his daughter's a white lady, and anyway, we're chatting, and I just mentioned him. I said about how I kind of like I like southern New Hampshire. I like the access to Boston, being close to Boston's nice. And I said I love northern New Hampshire for fishing and mountaineering and all that stuff. But I said I get a little nervous when I go north of Boston, north of Manchester, or north of Concord or something. He says you get a little nervous when you go.
I want to address that.
Anyway.
So my wife came. She was actually scared to come in. She goes, "It's mostly white."
We just have to watch time. We got about 7 minutes.
She goes, "It's a lot of white people." She was kind of
Yeah.
scared. She thought it was going to be racist, that there were going to be racist incidents, but that people were going to discriminate against her. And she got up here and she had an epiphany. She said, "People treat me nicer up here than in my former neighborhood in
Right.
Boston. There's less crime up here. People are civil. They're nice." And I'm not to say that again. There's not that there's racist, but we're scaring brown people and communities of color because white people are racist. Same thing with my friend from Haiti. I went to college with. I still keep in touch. She was driving up to Montreal. She was going to fly into Boston, hook up with one of her Haitian friends. They were going to drive through New Hampshire. They're going to go to Montreal because it has a huge Haitian community. And I talked to her before the trip, and she goes, "We want to spend some time, because New Hampshire, the rural New Hampshire with all the nature."
Yeah.
And she was so scared. She goes, "It's so white up there." She goes, she was
Right.
afraid of racist incidents and discrimination. People were going to use racist terms. And I talked to her after she got back. I said, now she lives in Miami, which has a high crime rate.
Yeah.
And she said it was wonderful. People were nice to us. They were civil. It was wonderful. And that's what's happening is not all the time, but people of color, Latino people and people of African descent are saying, "Oh, these white people are racist and they're going to be mean to you and you're going to have a," and then they come up here and those myths are dispelled. And that's what I'm concerned about, is that we're telling these kids or people,
So-
it's racism. If something happens that you don't like,
Right.
It's racist, and that's not.
And
That's corrosive and it's toxic.
yes, and I agree with that, and I see where you're coming from. And that's fine. So then I have to say that from somebody who sort of I've lived in a number of different countries where, albeit as a white Irish guy, I happen to be in a minority. Like I could tell you some incidents that would surprise you about not quite the Irish need not apply, but there were places where presumptions were made about you because you were Irish, and I found it very insulting, but I just laughed it off because I was
anything to do with alcohol?
It's something. I could tell you incidents about just the presumption of drunkenness, for instance, the presumption of fighting, the presumption of hot-temperedness.
Well, was Brendan Behan? He said the fighters in Ireland, I think, are from West Ireland. He goes, but people think that all the Irish are fighters.
And
but the fighters are from West Ireland.
They're no more fighters than anybody else. But anyway, let me go. But here's the thing. So what I learned as somebody coming at it from my point of view, and I didn't learn it for the first time. I was amazed at the distance between some, and I want to go back to the difference around those tables at those meetings. The biggest takeaway I had from those meetings was that that the gaps were much bigger than and they were ones of misunderstanding. A lot were of misunderstanding. I started off, I didn't really cover it, but I started off here saying I don't know of occasions or incidents of overt racism or whatever else. However, there's like strata going through, to pretend that there's no issue is also a problem, right? So I think the idea of sort of making it about race, and I hear conservatives sort of say this thing, liberals want to make it about race and a divide. I mean, that's a new artifice in American politics, which comes out of the Obama era, which was the argument around Obama who tried to make everything about race, and that's where Black Lives Matter came, all that stuff, and it's all just become very corrosive and damaging. So but I think about my own when I talk to young people at Central High School, never formally, but just some of my children's friends.
Yeah, like last week.
Yeah, so
we saw some of your daughter's friends.
Yeah. You did. When was that?
Right on the sidewalk when we left.
Oh, that's right. We did.
I was surprised. You were like a hero to them.
Yeah,
hey, Mr.
yeah, they're here, all right.
I thought you were like one of the Backstreet Boys, Justin Bieber. They were so happy to see you.
Keep it up. I pay him to be here. But no, when we talked about it, I talked to kids who were involved in Amnesty International, out of Central. They're down in New York, outside the UN, or they're visiting embassies, protesting, various things and talking issues of the human rights and all those things, and the attitude of many of the kids in Central High School was, what's the problem? Like, the doors are wide open. If they, in other words, some people in minority, ever want to walk through. Like, if you want to be on the whatever committee, then put your hand up. Like, no one's saying no, etc. So that's all fair enough. But I'll give you an example. I'm sorry we're down to 2 minutes, but I talked to two young ladies from Memorial once about a year ago.
Okay.
And they were wearing the hijab or the hijab, so we just talked. And they were both juniors. They told me. Anyway, I just started to talk to them. I met them casually, and at some event somewhere, and I said hi, and they said they're from Memorial. I said, oh, great. So I said to them, I was interested about the sports thing. I said, what sport? Do you play any sports? And they said, no. And we talked about that for a little bit, and this is not to be ingratiating myself to anybody, but I'll tell you what they told me at the end of the conversation.
Sure.
They went to walk away, and one of the two girls turned and came back, and she said, I want to tell you something. She said, I want to thank you for the way you spoke to us this evening. And it was only like a 5-minute conversation.
Yeah.
It wasn't a meeting. It was a side of the street meeting. You know what I mean? She said, nobody ever asked people like me, what sport do I play? Because all they see is Muslim, dark, immigrant, probably not allowed to play sports, must do what their brother tells them, the whole baggage. And she said, you didn't ask me any of those questions. You asked me about my academics. You asked me about my sports. And you treated me like you treat all the other kids here. The point was, she did relay about, in the earlier conversation when I asked about sports, she told me that she and her friend went out for basketball at Memorial. And they walked into the gym in their freshman year to join the freshman team. And when they walked in, the kids, and this is not about Memorial, I'm sure this is repeated across all schools, right? It's unusual the kids get on great together. Most, there's no issues. There are no like gang fights going on in our high schools amongst people of different minorities. You know what I mean? So that's not the issue. But these two girls had a real world where they actually, we have to wrap up, where they felt excluded. They just went there. They were there for a half an hour or something. Maybe there was a fault on behalf of a coach who didn't come over and wrap his arms around them or something. No, but you know what I mean? But I'm not. Again, it's about their perception. I'm not saying anything bad happened. But the point is, when you end up without, they felt excluded. They weren't angry about it or cross, but they did feel excluded. I'm sorry, Ross. We're going to have to do this again. They're telling me they're shutting us down. We'll be off the air anyway. Thank you very, very much. We'd have to do it again.